also for society. And yeah, one of the things that upsets me sometimes. And here you can see a difference. It's a really good example of, in the way that, you know, Ukrainian freedom is often seen as a good thing, but in many situations is really bad. So on the left, you can see picture from Ukraine, and this is non-recyclable garbage bin, but someone just put a lot of toys inside it because they were too lazy to go to a recycling station. And basically you can see all of this is just like one person put it. So this is, I find it outrageous, but this person thought that it's his right to do. While in Taiwan, people often complain about garbage trucks, but then when they have to throw away the garbage, they just line and wait to throw the garbage away. Now, when I compare Ukraine to Russia, because many people ask me, are Ukraine and Russia this similar? Are they the same? Well, Ukraine and Russia are very similar because we lived together for such a long time, but there are some very big differences between us. And one of the things is that when we're dissatisfied with something in Ukraine, we try to change it, or we at least try to protest against it, especially when it comes to some social things. So in Ukraine, we have protests about like even minor things. So maybe someone tries to build something next to my house, but they didn't really have all the documents. I have to complain about it. Or maybe they're too noisy, I'm going to protest. And if there are more serious things like police violence or corruption, we protest about it. But in Russia, they just do what they call kitchen debates, is that they see all the things they don't like and they just get upset, and then at night they come back home and they talk to their family or to their friends on their kitchen, how they hate everything and how they don't like everything and how everyone is bad and corrupt, but they never do anything. So that's my experience from life in Russia. They rarely protest. Even now, you know, war between Russia and Ukraine is something that Russia started. And then we almost don't see any protests, even though there are 140 million people in Russia. And we, of course, protests may be not safe in Russia, but in Belarus, many people support in Ukraine by trying to sabotaging the military operations or to sharing information with with Ukrainians and trying to make it harder for Russians and Belarusian forces to attack Ukraine. And people in Russia do that much less often, even though there are only, 5 million Belarusians and 140 million Russians. Now, as for the foreigners, Ukrainians, as I told you about it already, they are very curious about foreigners, but Russians, they hostility is not always the case, but hostility in terms of as if suspicion. Yeah, suspicion would be the right word. So they don't seem to trust the foreigners and foreign culture. And for this reason, while Ukrainians try to ask more about person, the country they came from, and their own culture, Russians would start telling them about how great Russian culture is and about Russia. And they would say, like, in Russia we do this, in Russia we do that. So this is very different for us in Ukraine. We usually ask people, not tell them. And in general, that's also a good thing, and it's a bad thing. In Ukraine is disregard to power and authorities. So sometimes we tend to have often conflicts in the workplace because boss wants to feel like a boss, but many workers, if they think he's not a good boss, they would give him like really hard time. And yeah, sometimes it's really hard. It can be a nightmare. But also it's really hard to control Ukrainians. And as you can see, this was happened in Russia. So with Russian right now, invasion right now. So because in Russia, they feel respect and fear of power and authorities. We think that one of the reasons they thought that when the military would come to a smaller town in Ukraine, people would be afraid of people with guns. But in Ukraine, it's very different. People just don't get scared of that. And as I told earlier, in Ukraine, people try to be nice to each other, while in Russia, people do not trust each other. So unless you're really close friends, so if you want to become if you want to learn more about Russia or Russian or become closer to them, you have to really try to be their friends, because until they're friends, they don't trust you. And here you can see protests in Ukraine and in Russia. So in Ukraine, people just basically can destroy public property because they don't like something. And of course, this is an extreme example. This is the 2014 protests. But in general, in Ukraine, protests are more, gather more people. People demand more, and they try to act more. While in Russia, you can see here is like one old lady, and next to her, 3 or 4 policemen. So, and people around, they will just take photos and make videos of this. In Ukraine, people will just like try to scare the police. So in first case, like people in Ukraine would ask for police names and tell them that they're not allowed to do that, stuff like that. So it's very different. Now let me tell you a bit about Ukrainian religion, and I'll just briefly tell you about it because it's not that important. So Ukrainians are Orthodox Christians, and it is different from Protestants or Catholics for historical reasons. And most of the differences that are for you, it would be like a difference in rituals, architecture, and clothes. So here you can see one of the churches in Kiev. This is a traditional Ukrainian style. And on the top, you can see the leader of Ukrainian church, actually ex-leader. So you can see that he's wearing this headgear and a big cross. And on the top, on the bottom right, you can see one of my favorite holidays in Ukraine. On this day, you bring flowers to the church, and then you get blessed with water. I think that's really fun. Now, as for the holidays and rituals, I think the biggest holidays in Ukraine are Easter and Christmas, and the difference between Ukraine or Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism or Protestants is that Easter is more important than Christmas. So Christmas is more like a time to have fun or maybe give gifts to the children, but Easter is really important, so everyone celebrates Easter. Now, as for the architecture, Ukrainians tend to build big cathedrals, and churches are usually white with green or golden domes, and they in general try to decorate them very richly inside with a lot of gold. You can see here the insides and outsides of Kiev Pечерська Lavra, one of the most important churches in Ukraine. Yeah. And also, apart from Orthodox Christianity, we have other Christians and also Muslims. As I told already, we have Crimean Tatars on the south, and also Judaism. But we have much less Jews than we used to have because of the World War II, and also because actually in Soviet Union, Jews were persecuted as well. So many of them were either repressed or had to leave the country. Now, when we compare Ukrainian religion in Ukraine and Taiwan, I think the difference is that the way people treat religion is that people in Ukraine go to church. I mean, there are some religious people, but if you talk about people in general, people go to church only for major events and holidays such as Easter or Christmas. While people in Taiwan go to temples even for minor things, for example, before exams, I think it's really fun and it's really interesting, and it's very different from Ukraine. Now, in Ukraine, we have some weird rituals, but most of them, they're kind of like stay in limits of what church allows. And also in Taiwan, we have more religions, but also some of the rituals I think are really weird and dangerous. So here are some of the examples. So this is, I think, the craziest Ukrainian religious celebration is called the water blessing. On this day, it is believed that all the water is holy water in any body of water. So you can swim in the river and then you become blessed. And the thing about this holiday is that it's in winter, so it's really cold outside, maybe -15 or -20, but people still swim in the river. And in Taiwan, first of the things I noticed when I came to Taiwan is this like thing when for the holidays, they bring cars with people dancing on top. And sometimes it's like older men, which is also weird, but sometimes it's just pretty girls dancing on the streets for the gods. I think in Ukraine, church would not allow that. Another thing is those like Taoist rituals when you have a lot of blood around. Wow, that's really creepy for me. Like, wow, I saw this once by accident, and I was really shocked. And yeah, also the way you treat fireworks is very different. So this is, I'm not sure if it's Yenshui, the Beehive Festival, but like yeah, this is something that never happens in Ukraine. So people not only go to see fireworks, they also want to be hit by the fireworks. And for me, it's like really interesting because it's such a big contrast between how Taiwanese people behave in normal life and how they behave during such festivals. Now, when we compare Ukraine to Russian, in general, the religions are very similar. But in Ukraine, even though most of people are Orthodox Christians, people are friendlier to other religions, while in Russia people are suspicious toward other religions. Especially, it really bewilders me with Islam because there are so many Muslims in Russia, and then when they have Ramadan, for example, they have to pray in Moscow. People get offended and really angry about that. And as for the church holidays, I think in Ukraine, even though people go to church during the major holidays, it's not your obligation. You just go there because you want to. But in Russia, for many people, it's because they have to socialize. And they also sometimes offend pro-government demonstrations just because to show that they're like one of the Russians, not because they actually like the religion or the holiday. And here you can see the demonstration of this difference. Here you can see Ukrainian president around surrounded by the leaders of all the churches of Ukraine. So here is a Jew leader and also the Muslim leader and the two of Christian leaders. And this guy, the one with the beard, I don't even know what that religion is, but he meets all of them. And for Russian president, that's his common party. He hangs out with the leader of Orthodox Church of Russia and his military. These are his best friends. And not a single time he met a Muslim leader of Russia or a Buddhist leader of Russia, even though these are really major religions in Russia. Now let's talk a bit about food. So food in Ukraine is very different, and I have a friend who used to live Taiwanese friend who used to live in Ukraine, and in general he says that the food is more boring for him because main taste we have savory is basically not much flavor, or it's sour, or maybe bitter, or sweet, but maybe too much sweet. So we don't eat that much spicy. And we mostly eat wheat and corn and oats and also potatoes. So maybe bread and potatoes is something we eat all the time. As for the favorite dishes, we eat beetroot soup very often. It's a very traditional soup that we eat with bread and garlic maybe, and also with the sour cream. So this white stuff inside is the sour cream. And also we eat dumplings, and I'll tell a bit about them later. And the favorite sauce that we have is the sour cream. So basically it's made with milk and it's sour, and we eat it with everything. So with sweets, we can eat sour cream. With potatoes, with a soup, we can eat sour cream all the time. Now, when it comes to Taiwan and Ukraine dumplings do come from China, so they are quite similar in all the countries. What is different is that what you put inside. So in Taiwan, maybe you put pork and cabbage and other meats and seafood and vegetables. And in Ukraine, the most common fillings are potatoes with onions, or cabbage with carrots, or cheese. And we usually put salty or sweet cheese. And my favorite ones are the ones with fruits, especially with sour cherry. This is a very popular one, and I think it's very, very different from Taiwan. So while you only use soy sauce or chili sauce, in Ukraine, we tend to use for savory dumplings, butter with fried onion or bacon, and for sweet ones, honey with the sour cream. So in Ukraine, we can eat sour cherry dumplings with sour cream, and honey. And it's really, really tasty. So here you can see what Ukrainian dumplings look like. On the left are the one with potatoes, and on the right are with sour cherries. Okay, now the last part is war with Russia, and I try to introduce as much as possible, even though we don't have much time. So it's really hard because it's a really complex topic. I will start from afar. So what makes a country? There are two big concepts about it. Is there? It's an ethnic nation or a civic nation. Now, for ethnic nation, a country should consist of people who share language, history, ethnicity, maybe religion or culture. And the idea of civic nation is that people are willing to work together, to live together, to create certain rules to live together. And there is no like right or wrong idea of nation here. Is that something some people believe is more applicable for them? Now, I don't have this slide, but for Taiwan, it can also be a question to think, is it an ethnic nation? Should you provide more ideas to support your shared aspects such as language or history? Or is it a civic nation, as in like the rules that you live together right now? So when we talk about Ukraine and Russia, Russians think that Ukraine is just a dialect of Russian, and Ukrainians obviously think that Ukrainian language is different from Russian. So why is it even a question? I don't honestly know, but actually I think Slavic languages are more similar than some dialects of Chinese language. So for Ukrainians, for example, we can speak both Ukrainian and Russian. But actually, many Russians, they don't understand Ukrainian like at all. Now, Russians think that we share the same history. That's why we are basically the same country. But for Ukrainians, we think that we share only the Kiev-Rus part of history between 19th and 13th century, which collapsed almost 800 years ago. So we have 800 years of each our own history. And the Russians say that we follow the same religion, even though they have many Muslims and Buddhists in Russia. And in Ukraine, we have church and we have state, and we say that these are two different things. So what religion I am, it doesn't matter anything about the country. And then this is like one of the ridiculous claims that actually Putin made himself, is that Ukrainian ethnicity is made up, or that Ukraine was created by Lenin. And yeah, for us, it's just, like it's us. So how just makes no sense. And finally, back to what I said before. So Russians think that Russia is an ethnic nation. And also it claims that all the Russian speakers, all the Russian speaking territories should become Russia. That's a very common Russian claim. And if you watch Russian TV, they do say it very often. So their idea of Russian state is much beyond Russia itself. Now, for Ukraine, we believe that Ukraine is a civic nation, so it doesn't matter where we come from. It doesn't matter what is our background. What matters is that are we willing to live together in a democratic state? Are we ready to tolerate each other despite our differences? So that's what Ukraine is. And yeah, so as you can see, even though we are really closely related, Russian idea of the state and Ukrainian idea of the state is very, very different. And yeah, obviously, implication for the war is that for Russia, their claim over Ukraine is absolutely right, because they are protecting themselves, because they are freeing the Russian-speaking territory from Ukrainians, and because they have the right to extend their ethnic nation. Now, for Ukrainians, it just makes no sense. Ukraine is just a country, and we just want to live by the rules that we make up ourselves, for ourselves. Now, the question is, when did this war start? Of course, for many people, especially those who are not familiar with Ukraine, it started this year in February, just a bit less than 4 months ago. But when you think about historical reasons, Russia was always about geographical expansion and conquest of new territories. ever since 14th century. And according to President Vladimir Putin, the main key values of Russian state are patriotism and efficiency, whatever that means. So from this point of view, the war between Ukraine and Russia started in 15th century when Moscow started its expansion, because from that point, they had this idea that they have to control all the lands around them. And that's very important to understand, is that even if Ukraine falls to Russia, it doesn't mean that the war will stop, because Russian idea of what they have to control is much beyond Russia, it's much beyond Ukraine. So if you watch Russian TV, they claim over like Baltic states, like Lithuania or Estonia. They claim over Belarus. Obviously, it's just a fact. Belarus is Russia, and over Poland, and then Czech Republic, and so on. And if you listen to propagandists, they say that Russian military bases have to be in Portugal. So Russia has to be all the way from Japan to Great Britain. And where does this come from? So first of all, let me tell you that ever since Soviet Union collapsed, Russia attacked its neighbors, including Ukraine, in 2014. And first time Russia tried to take over Crimea happened just 1 year after Ukrainian independence. And the compromise was to give the Russians to have the right to have military base in Crimea, which turned out to become the base for their invasion in 2014. And also we had another conflict in 2003. After this, we had to share the Sea of Azov. So even though most parts are closer to Ukraine, now Russia can operate their businesses there. I mean, then. Now Russia just took over it. And when you think about where this comes from, here is the map of Russian Empire in 1866. As you can see, dark blue are the territories that were directly controlled by Russia, and they even controlled Alaska in America, as you can see. And light blue are the countries that were subordinate to Russia. So you can see here, you can see Mongolia, parts of Korea and China were also subordinate to Russian Empire in 1866. But ever after that, Russian countries started to slowly decrease in size. First, they lost territories in America. Actually, they sold those territories themselves, but sometimes they still claim territories in America. Then they also lost territories in Europe and shrank to the size of Soviet Union. So Soviet Union is much smaller than Russian Empire. And then this is Russia. So Russia lost the Central Asia, and Russia lost Eastern European countries. And for many Russians, they consider this as a disaster. It's like, for them, it's the worst thing that happened. So when we talk about direct war with Russia, it started in 2014. So we had demonstrations against our president, and then over 100 people were killed, and the president just escaped the country to Russia. And for Ukrainians, we thought that we finally won the war against our president. Now we can have democratic state, and because he was trying to impose some totalitarian rules over us. So it was more about Ukrainian dignity and the right of self-expression. And we were preparing to elect new president and parliament, and the country was in general really, really weak. So Russia just took this moment to take over Crimea, and then they first they blocked Ukrainian military bases, and then they conducted referendum. And of course, no one in the world recognized it, because it was just made with Russians without any foreign recognition. And after that, they attacked all the Russian-speaking regions on the south of Ukraine and also in the east of Ukraine. So not only the ones that were controlled by them, but they failed pretty much everywhere. So what they did instead, they started to enforce direct military action on the border with Russia, in the bordering regions. So the fights that we have quite often are framed as civil conflict, as if Ukrainians fight with Ukrainians. But the reality is that it started and it keeps on going only because of the Russian presence. So even though many people in Ukraine do support Russia, military presence is predominantly Russian. So the active war lasted only for 2 years, but it actually never stopped until now. So we had a war for all these 8 years, and some people died. And but after 2015, not that many people died, but still we had a war, and it impacted our life in Ukraine. Now, here are some photos for you. These are the pro-democracy demonstrations in 2014. And as you can see, this is one of the days when it had the most people. And it is reported that on the most crowded day, it had like 500,000 people on the demonstrations. So basically, all the city center was full of people, flooded with people, so many people. And this is the Crimea occupation. You can see a Russian military person in front of a Ukrainian base. And here, this photo is in Kharkiv. A person takes down Ukrainian flag to put on Russian flag. And then it was later found out that this person, he is actually himself is Russian. So they did it and they claimed on Russian TV that these are Ukrainians who want to become part of Russia. But these people are not Ukrainians even. And also here, the Ukrainian separatists, how they call them. And you can clearly see, I mean, I will tell you, that the person in the middle, in the front, he has a modern Russian gun that Ukraine never had. So they were provided by Russia to fight against Ukrainians. Now, during this time, war started not exactly unpredictably, but we didn't really believe that it will start because it just makes no sense to us so much. And the claims of Russia, what they want is to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Now the question is, what does it mean? Well, no one really knows what it means. And most likely it's to gain control over every part of Ukraine they can. So initially their plan was, as it was discovered already, is to take over Kiev in 3 days. And then they thought that all Ukrainians will give up the fight and become part of Russia, or like elect a pro-Russian president, of course, in a Russian stage election. But then they just keep on changing their claims, and they keep on saying that everything goes according to the plan, but no one knows what the plan is. So that's actually one of the, it shows that they kind of fail, but it also is scary because it shows that they can continue until a really, really long time. And so until when it's going to continue? So Russian claims that it saves Ukraine from evil Nazi militaries who took over Ukraine. Even Russian international affairs minister, like yesterday, he told about that. Like when he was asked about, because now they are blocking Ukrainian ports to export grain from Ukraine. And they keep on saying that they're just protecting Ukrainians from the Nazis. They're not blocking anything. That's what they keep on saying. So that's their claim. And so, but the question is, how successful are they? And of course, Russian army is very big, and it's not as good as we thought, but it's just really, really big. So their attack is not very successful, and Ukraine gets all the support that it gets. Especially, we are very surprised, for example, from Taiwan, we get so much support. It really means a lot to us. And so thank you guys, and thanks to the Taiwanese for this support. But still, because Russian army is so big, we don't know when it's going to finish. And now we can see the signs that Ukrainians slowly start to take over some territories, but it doesn't mean that we will win. So it doesn't even mean that we will win. So because Russia has nuclear weapons, you know, and they can always resort to using nuclear weapons. But it doesn't mean that it will happen soon, that's for sure. Even if the Russian army becomes very weak, they will keep on sending their troops until they're out of troops or until something happens to Putin. So it can last for years, really. But we hope it will end soon. That's what we hope for. So what can we do in Taiwan for Ukraine? So first of all, try to read news from Ukrainian or European sources, especially if you can speak English. I think it can provide you more insight into what's going on. I think another thing is big problem that many Taiwanese get information from Chinese sources, maybe not on purpose, and Chinese perception of the situation comes from the Russian perspective. So sometimes it's very distorted. I mean, it doesn't happen that often, but sometimes it happens. So try to be careful with that. And also you can spread the word about the war, or maybe also educate yourself. So maybe just read a bit more, and I will also try to compile and send you some more sources about the war, and it tells you a bit more about it. And if you have a chance, if you have money that you can donate directly to Ukrainian government or maybe to Taiwanese funds, you can do it, and it will help a lot. Even if you donate even just a tiny amount, maybe $10, is still a help. It still helps a lot. And yeah, as I said, do not read or trust Chinese sources. And like, yeah, it applies not only to the war in Ukraine, but in general, because yeah, I don't think Chinese sources should be trusted. Now, what can we do in Taiwan for Taiwan? I think you can also try to get more conscious. I mean, of course, I'm just a foreigner. So what I'm saying is my perspective, and I may be absolutely wrong about this because you're Taiwanese and you should know more than me. But try to learn the history of Taiwan and about different aspects of history and about different people of history. And try to develop your own Taiwanese culture and understand more about your own identity and also local languages. And yeah, I think one great thing about Taiwan is that you have this civic society where you can vote and protest and be free to express yourself, even if you don't like anything. So you can cherish it. You can go for votes. You should do it. I think you should just use it as much as you can. And remember that as it happened with Ukraine before, and as it happens with many countries, giving up even like a bit of autonomy will not stop any expansion of a bigger country. You can see, for example, what China does in Hong Kong, right? So first they just told that they will control Hong Kong politically, and then they have to still keep Hong Kongese rights, but then they just keep on decreasing it and decreasing it just because they can. And that's what happens with big countries all the time. So yeah, in general, I think you should not trust China. And there is much more I can tell you, but we have limited time. And also this conflict is very, very complex. So maybe you have questions, so you can ask me questions. And for now, we have some memes, but maybe they're a bit old. So here you can see some memes about Ukrainian president. As you said, like many people like him a lot. And yeah, compare him and tell about him a lot. Yeah, he's a news about the president mostly. And this guy on the left, by the way, he's half Korean, and he's the leader of the city on the east of Ukraine, very close to the Russian army, Russian military forces, and he's very, very calm and peaceful all the time. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and I hope you really enjoyed it, and I'm sorry that the polls didn't work. So I hope it was not boring for you. Now, if you have any questions, you can ask them now.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. And now we are going to have a Q&A time. We are going to use Slido. So the student, if you have, thank you.